Hello, all. This is The Wondering Eye. I want to weigh in on the debate surrounding the recent Supreme Court decision pertaining to birthright citizenship. Um, I genuinely believe that this decision constitutes the greatest single shift in the nature of the government of the United States that has occurred uh, in a century, possibly ever, including the changes that occurred in consequence of the Civil War. And I'll explain why I believe this. Ultimately, I think that this decision fundamentally signifies the official end of the American political project and creates from the United States Constitution hereto the effective sovereign of the American polity, of the American people, a despot. Uh, by its own admission, this Supreme Court majority opinion uh, fundamentally delegitimizes the United States Constitution and therefore the political entity which it uh, gives breath to. So, the reason that I say this is because there's a particular series of quotes in this majority opinion which uh, both sets forth the basis for legitimate government uh, and undermines that very basis, though it does not seem to see the flaw in its own logic here. But this comes down to whether we are a particular nation, a particular entity, as the United States of America, as the American polity, or whether we are a liberal universalist crusader state, a an entity which fundamentally has allegiances that are not to its own people, but rather to all people categorically, and whose imperative is not the maintenance of a particular society, and as the preamble of the Constitution sets forth, the securing of the blessings of liberty to the people of the United States of America and their posterity, but rather the securing of the blessings of liberty to all people in all places. Ultimately, the United States Constitution, as originally written and ratified, is a deeply particular and not universalist liberal document. Uh, as I said, the preamble is very explicit in saying that the Constitution is established by the people of the United States of America, among other things, in order to secure liberty and its blessings to themselves and their posterity. Uh, the aspect of the Constitution which some people set forth as being liberal universalist is the Bill of Rights. Of course, those of us who are of the Southern persuasion understand that the Bill of Rights is a direct consequence of the efforts of the anti-federalists against the will of many on the pro-ratification side of the debate to include further guarantees of protections of the rights of individuals and of states against encroachment by the newly constituted federal and national government. However, uh, well after the Civil War, when many people believe this change to have taken place, uh, there was a Supreme Court decision called Gitlau v. New York, or in a case called Gitlau v. New York, in which this process that is known as incorporate or not incorporation. Yes, I believe it is incorporation of the Bill of Rights was begun. And essentially, what this did is it used the 14th Amendment to uh, redefine the Bill of Rights as no longer being a series of protections against federal overreach, but now as being guarantees of individual rights, which would be protected not only against the federal government, but also against the various state governments. So we thus exit a frame of reference in which the states are the immediate protectors of the individual citizens within their bounds, against the anticipated encroachment from the federal and central government. But now the federal government is the protector of the individual's rights against the state and local governments. So it's a complete upending of the pre-existing constitutional order. And this is when we became genuinely, as a matter of constitutional law and precedence, a national rather than a federal republican polity. But we were still a particular nation. Americans were still a distinct people, and this crusading spirit for the universalization of liberal individual rights was still in its early stages. This obviously is something that was fundamentally begun, uh, one might say, under Abraham Lincoln, knowingly or unknowingly, and continued throughout the latter part of the 19th century through the progressive movement, and then into the 20th century with both the civil rights movement and the Cold War generally. And really, American history since the Civil War has been the history of this increasingly crusading and increasingly universalist liberal impulse, which has made us less and less particular in our conduct as a nation. We have made our story of ourselves and who we are the story of a people whose sole purpose for existence is to further this cause of egalitarian liberalism on the world stage, be it in the form of democracy and capitalism and quote unquote the free world in the Cold War, be it initially, for instance, in the Civil War with the emancipation of the slaves and this notion of further instituting equality among men across racial lines and across civilizational lines, then the women's rights movement, the civil rights movement, obviously the Cold War, and then in the 21st century, all of these interventionist wars that we've had in the Middle East for the overthrowing of secular tyrants who were themselves particular rulers who essentially found themselves saddled with non-existent states, by which I mean states defined by geography rather than genuine nationality. So these are states and not nations. Their borders exist as a matter of procedure and not as a matter of fact of who controls territory on the ground. And so, for instance, with Saddam Hussein or Gaddafi, they are endeavoring to impose order within a specific set of boundaries that they do not necessarily determine. They are considered to be the legitimate rulers of their particular states, but these states do not map onto a demos, a people. And so they are trying to work out an arrangement, such as our Constitution endeavors to do, between different peoples in order to establish concord and allow for society to function. And that is what the Constitution does. It creates a structure through a series of compromises which was intended to facilitate peaceful coexistence and cooperation between disparate states, peoples, classes, etc. But this Supreme Court decision, I think, genuinely makes us, as a matter of judicial precedent, as a matter of constitutional law, it makes us a mandatory universalist liberal state. And the quote that goes most directly to this end is toward the end of the majority opinion, where they say that, quote, citizenship then and now was the right to have rights, to freely participate in our political community. The framers of the 14th Amendment extended that promise to, quote, every freeborn person in this land, unquote. We keep that promise today. So they essentially admit that the reason for their ruling as they have ruled is because citizenship is the vehicle whereby individual rights are conferred upon individuals by the national government. Now, this is such a bungled and erroneous reading of the American notion of individual rights that it's completely asinine. But the fact that we, with a supposedly 6-3 supermajority conservative Supreme Court, what some people have said is the most conservative Supreme Court in American history, still get a 6-3 supermajority defense of birthright citizenship is, I think, as much proof as one could possibly need that the constitutional order of the United States is finished. Uh, we have been declared to be a universalist liberal empire whose purpose is to extend rights to people who are not by any reasonable right Americans. And uh, since the United States has essentially failed in its previous nation building model of using military intervention to further the cause of universal liberalism throughout the Middle East and elsewhere, uh, since American government has proven to be, since the American Constitution has proven to be a pattern which is insufficiently suited to just map onto another people somewhere else in the world arbitrarily, as we see throughout South America, where they have constitutions very similar to ours in word, but their countries function completely differently from ours. Uh, since we have essentially failed to export the model of American government elsewhere in the world, uh, that moral imperative to expand the uh, domain of universal liberalism, the domain in which individual human rights are recognized and respected as the state sees them. Uh, we've not been able to expand that through force and nation building, so they've decided instead to just import everyone in the world, essentially, and bestow upon them the rights of the citizen in order that they can exist within a context that recognizes their God-given rights in the liberal universalist framework. And uh, it's interesting that elsewhere in the majority opinion in this Supreme Court case on birthright citizenship, the justices set forth the basis for political legitimacy uh, in the English common law tradition, and they seemingly do not understand that they are themselves here explicitly breaching that basis for legitimacy and essentially declaring the government that they represent and the constitution on which they are ruling or which they are interpreting to be illegitimate. They say, let's see. So they say earlier in the majority opinion that, quote, the story of citizenship in the United States begins with the English common law. Before the Revolution, the American colonists, like all in the British Empire, were considered subjects of the sovereign. Note that throughout this example, the sovereign in the United States today is the Constitution itself rather than a king or a particular individual or even the Supreme Court. Uh, that arose not from royal fiat, but from what the common law conceived as the relationship between the sovereign and the people. The king, Blackstone explains, so this is referring to Blackstone's commentaries on the English common law, owes those, quote, born within the dominions a duty of protection. And, quote, in return for that protection, those born within the dominions owe the king or sovereign a duty of allegiance. So they set forth that the basis for the legitimacy of the king's law, of all of English and British law, and by extension, American law, which is based largely upon it, upon English common law. The basis for that legitimacy is this relationship between the sovereign, in which the sovereign protects the people, and the people owe the sovereign fealty, and essentially they invest it with legitimacy in response in this mutual trade of duties. And since the Constitution has, by this Supreme Court decision, been essentially declared to apply to all peoples at all places in the world, it is redefined the United States Constitution from a particularistic to a universalist liberal document. that relationship, that duty of the sovereign to the people, of the United States Constitution to the particular American people to protect them, in this instance, against all peoples elsewhere in the world, against foreign threats, against the encroachment of other cultures, civilizations, etc., which mean to do us harm, uh, that duty has not been delivered upon. It has been manifestly neglected, and it has been declared to be unconstitutional to go back upon that neglect, to actually cease to neglect the people of the United States in this way. And so we have no prospect of legislative overturning of this reading, despite what some are attempting to do right now in Congress. It is explicitly set forth in this majority opinion that the legislature, be it Congress or the state legislatures, cannot uh, redefine birthright citizenship in order to deny citizenship to any person born within the United States, essentially, except under very specific circumstances, which do not include illegal immigration. And so these people who have no allegiance to our sovereign, to our Constitution, to anything in our country or in our traditions, who are not of us or for us. They are not the people. They are not the demos. They come here and we are not protected in any way by the Constitution, by the sovereign against them, or any ill plans that they may have toward us. And this fundamentally delegitimizes the Constitution. So I found a quote from John Randolph of Roanoke, which, even though you have to sort of map it onto the current context, I think that it applies fairly well and helps to explain some of the motivations of what's going on in this particular instance. So, the way that I conceive of it is that I'm not going to profess to be the biggest fan of democracy as a form of government, meaning merely majoritarianism. But I do believe in the demos. I do believe in a right, as uh, spoken of in the Declaration of Independence, of a people, a distinct people, to determine the form of its own government, a right of popular sovereignty in essence, a right of a nation to existence. And that is precisely what is being denied to us under this Supreme Court ruling and now under the established law of the United States Constitution. But John Randolph of Roanoke at one point was speaking against majoritarianism, against democracy or ochlocracy, and essentially defending the propertied interest. And so I wanted to just set forth that basically, as I read this quote, think of the propertied classes, in his words, as the citizenry, as the actual American people, as the enfranchised, recognized American people, the heritage Americans, as many people have put it, the founding stock. And think of all of the other peoples in the world in the eyes of liberal universalists, and now apparently through the lens of the United States Constitution as interpreted by the current Supreme Court, as the unpropertied classes, as the disenfranchised or the unenfranchised, as the downtrodden, the oppressed, etc. So the American people are the aristocrats, are the propertied class. He says here, and this is quoted and added to a little bit by Russell Kirk in The Conservative Mind on page 165. So it says, Roanoke's second security against, second security for justice and liberty lay in common sense government. Mr. Chairman, I go for solid security. Most men may be trusted to choose their own representatives, but few can be trusted farther in politics. Illusions of direct democracy, that is majoritarianism, lead to direct tyranny. The franchise should be the privilege of citizens whose stake in the Commonwealth and whose moral character, to some extent, lift them above the temptations of power to which corrupt human nature is terribly susceptible. Freeholders only should have the right to vote. Property must have its special representation and protection, since property travels with power. You can only cause them to change hands, and if power be transferred to the propertyless, soon they will make themselves affluent. Government is not a matter of simple nose counting. No, sir, a Negro boy with a knife and a tally stick is a statesman complete in this school. King numbers, the principle of determining profound questions, really matters to be settled by application of high moral principles and enlightened expediency, by a tally of heads, is the iron despot of modern times. The application of quote-unquote democratic methods arbitrarily to every controversy, heedless of particular circumstances and intricacies, is consummate stupidity. It is not an incantation, it is no talisman, it is not witchcraft, it is not a torpedo to benumb us. Randolph declared that he would flee from old Virginia if the time came when this nation, or when this notion should be applied in all its rigor. Taxation without representation certainly is tyranny, yet precisely this is introduced by Democrats who give power to the unpropertied classes. Men of property, the rampart of a state, are abandoned to be plundered at discretion by the ochlocracy. So, like I said, in this case, it's the citizenry, it's the demos being plundered by an indiscriminate, pure numbers notion of majoritarianism. Democracy is seen by the liberal universalist state as a mere counting of heads or a counting of noses, as Randolph here puts it. Uh, and no distinction is made between the aristocrat, between the citizen in this case, and the propertyless, the non-citizen, the outside world mass, because our Constitution is being read as the Constitution of the world, is being read as the vehicle by which the divinely bestowed rights of each individual in the world are recognized and applied by governments. And since we have failed to establish military control for international liberal universalism, the liberal universalist states of the West are importing the world in order to bestow human rights upon them. This essentially makes each of our nations, each of our governments, and the states that they represent, which are no longer nations, they're mere lines on a map. They are mere geographical spaces which do not represent a people. It makes them illegitimate. And the danger is that they understand this and that they are endeavoring through migration to destroy the actual people, the demos, which, as we see in the Declaration, possesses the sole right to institute legitimate government. It is from the demos, from the people, that the right of sovereignty derives. And it is this right of sovereignty which has been used to institute, to create each of these governments in the West. But they now use this sovereignty. They extend it to all of the world through liberal universalist ideas. And they make the people from whom they got this legitimacy merely a class of no particular significance within what they see as their rightful domain. They see all peoples as their due subjects, as their rightful citizens, and their duties are not to a particular people, they are to all people. So they want to destroy the people, the specific people, in this case, Western peoples, European peoples, the American people, from which their power originally came, because they understand that only this people can uh, essentially gain sufficient consciousness to reclaim that sovereignty which it surrendered to the state and abolish and reconstitute a government on legitimate grounds, as Jefferson puts it, on such grounds as they see best fit for the security of their freedom and safety, in essence. That's a paraphrase. But I genuinely, I believe that I and you, genuine, actual, real Americans and Europeans as well, because the EU is a liberal universalist project founded upon notions of human rights, uh, which actively discriminates against and endeavors to destroy the collective existence of their original citizenry. Our duty to our sovereign, whatever sovereign that may be. In Britain, it is the king and parliament. In the United States, it is the Constitution. Our duty to our sovereigns by nature of their redefinition into liberal universalist sovereigns, into kings of all peoples instead of kings of a people, our duty is dissolved. The political legitimacy is completely dissipated from every Western government, and it is the duty of the people to reconstitute their governments on such grounds and according to such principles as they see most fit, as they see most suited to secure their future safety and happiness. So that is my message for America's 250th. We made it to average. The American political project has endured for the average lifespan of a republic, although that we are a republic I contest. We've been an empire since 1865, but nonetheless, we do still exist in some form. And I believe that the American political project must be dissolved if the American people are to endure. We may reconstitute new government, and I hope that we carry many principles that existed at and in our founding forward into whatever may come next. But we must learn from the mistakes that we've made and from the pernicious influence of liberal universalism, which has so long haunted this nation and has stolen our sovereignty from us. We must prevent these seeds from being sown into whatever may come next. And we must move forward with an understanding that fundamentally each and every citizen of a Western nation today lives within tyranny, today lives under a despot and not a rightful sovereign who does not see them as their proper people, as their proper charge, as their citizens or their subjects, as their duty. The sovereigns have dissolved their relationships with their previous peoples, and our duties to them are thereby ended as well. Will I still fly the American flag? I'm pondering that. Uh, but this is a momentous decision. And I do not believe that our nation can recover from this. Short of a constitutional amendment which clarifies the 14th Amendment and puts an end to this liberal universalist heresy, this coup against the Constitution, I do not believe that our nation ever can recover from this precedent. And I do not believe that, as a matter of practical politics, we will ever pass another constitutional amendment. So, to what level does the sovereignty now rightfully devolve? Is it to the states to reconstitute a union of some other sort under a new constitution? Is it merely all the way back to the people? At what point can legitimate government today be instituted and practiced? I do not know. That's a conundrum that we will have to deal with. But this is where I am at in the wake of this decision. This is how I see it. And I would love to hear your thoughts on this very difficult topic. Thank you very much. Deo Vendis.